of great things to talk about here on the program today. But first, we get to bring on a great friend, Congressman Chip Roy. Always a pleasure to visit with Congressman Roy. Welcome to the Mark Davis Show. Congressman, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing great, and it's great to be on, and great to start by talking to you, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got obviously there's a lot to talk about, but before we get to the 119th Congress and some of what you'll be fighting for, and you're one of our big conservative fighters in Congress, we appreciate that. How do you think the transition's going? What do you think about the cabinet picks that Trump has gone through and selected so far?
Well, look, first of all, I think, obviously we're delighted, broadly speaking, with the election. President Trump did well. As many of us have been saying in those last couple of weeks, or at least a few of us, we thought he would win at least one or two of the blue so-called firewall states up there. And, obviously ended up sweeping those big three. The House is a little tighter than we would have preferred. Yeah. The Senate is about a seat, more than I thought it'd be 52. We got 53. Heck, we could have ended up at 54 or 5. But, we've got a mandate. And now to answer your question, the president has to, in order to deliver, we've got to have a cabinet that'll help us deliver, right?
Yeah.
And I think the president has done a really good job of appointing people who will be the disruptors that are necessary to disrupt the status quo in Washington. There are some obvious people that are either in the cabinet or cabinet adjacent, like Tom Homan, as borders are operating out of the White House. My friend Russ Vought as the head of the Office of Management and Budget. I think we've got some interesting and different picks with Tulsi, who's become a good friend of mine, lives here in Texas now, and John Ratcliffe, a local in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, who I think will do a good job in the intelligence role. And so I think there's Pete Hegseth, I think, to really take on and shake up the Department of Defense. There's been a couple that haven't been my favorite. Not a big fan of the Surgeon General appointment. Got one or two concerns with a couple of other appointments. But look, overall, you got to give the president his due. And we're going to, get busy working on what we need to do to get to deliver for the American people. Because if we don't, Republicans will be rightly placed on the ash bin of history if we don't deliver.
I mentioned earlier, you're one of our big conservative fighters there in Congress. You mentioned the Surgeon General. Who else do you have concerns about, and what are your concerns?
Well, look, I mean, I'm going to be a little careful here to allow the president his due and get through the confirmation process. I'm not, but look, the Surgeon General, I think, has said some things over time that I disagree with in terms of the vaccination of children, in terms of the forced masking of children. I think there's been a couple of questionable abortion things the Surgeon General has talked about. I think, look, I think the CMS appointment of Dr. Oz, which of course reports up to HHS, is, I don't know, a little questionable and whatnot. But look, Bobby Kennedy's also become a friend of mine, and we don't agree on everything. Obviously, he's got a more liberal perspective on certain things, but I think he's got the right disruption perspective on taking on the, NIH and taking on the CDC and USDA. And then I think he will work with us to try to take on big pharma, big insurance, and big hospital to empower patients. But that's one of those areas where we're going to have to kind of really work and see. I'm not interested in a single payer approach. I'm interested in disrupting the corporate cronyism and what's going on between big government and the corporations to squash our ability to go to the doctor of our choice. So there's some things we've got to kind of shape, but I'm gonna let the Senate go through the confirmation process, and I'm going to work with all the nominees. But there's a couple others. I might have maybe gone a little different way, but it's not my job.
Well, and I mean, but this also goes along, I think, with what you get from a Donald Trump, who is not, he's never been he wasn't elected as the most conservative guy in the world. He was elected as the disruptor, if you will. And so in some ways, it's not too surprising that I guess his cabinet looks like a disruptor type of cabinet instead of what you would think of as a maybe, up and down conservative cabinet.
Yeah, I think that is right. Is the way I've been characterizing it is that disruption. We have been stuck for too long. And look, I obviously would. My choice would be a disruptive conservative cabinet.
Right.
I think there's a lot of disruptive conservatives that are involved in this process, but there's also some that are going to disrupt in other ways. At the end of the day, what matters the most is that we break the back of the bureaucracy, the bureaucrats, through what the Department of Government Efficiency is doing. Now, look, my criticism there is I want it to be the Department of Government Elimination more than I want it to be the Department of Government Efficiency. Efficient government has never been my goal. But yeah, I do think there's so much that we can cut if we target it. I think that Elon and Vivek and those guys will do a good job. But again, now the rubber meets the road. One of the primary problems in Washington has been a Congress that has allowed our nation to go off the rails, and so it gets whipsawed every 4 or 8 years by an executive who is now bouncing from party to party and ideology to ideology. Congress is going to have to do the thing now to see if we can get transformational change to restore the limited government that empowers states and people and dismantles the bureaucracy that has been weaponized against the people, that undoes all of the disruption that has occurred now in a negative way in terms of our border by the radical leftists, the radical progressive Democrats. We've got to get the government back to its core job of securing the United States, making sure that we're got a strong military, secure border, enforcing the rule of law, and then getting the hell out of the way of the American people. That is the most important thing we can do between the president and Congress. And now Congress has to deliver.
Visiting with Congressman Chip Roy, do you think? Okay, forget about 4 years. We know it's a 4-year term for Trump. We got to break this down into 2 years because we know right now Republicans have the House and the Senate. We don't know what's going to happen after that. I think that Congress right now and Republicans overall have a unique 2-year span, and maybe actually a little bit less than that if you put the election time in there. But it's a unique 2-year span to get some real work done to better this country. Do you think that Congress and the 119th Congress has the guts to do what needs to be done?
Well, this is now to age myself, $64,000 question, right? We know that the president will be willing to challenge, but he's going to have a Congress that will go right alongside with him and both push him and go alongside of him on the issues that matter. So, for example, let's pick a couple. Congress is going to have to deliver on the border. It is not enough for the president to come in, reestablish the Remain in Mexico policy, reestablish something in the zip code of Title 42, use the executive powers to stop the flow, end the abuse of parole, end the CBP-1 app where they release people into the country, go get ICE to go enforce the law. It's not enough to just do that. And it's not enough for Congress just to give him more money to do that. We need transformational change. We need laws that are written to tighten the abuses by previous presidents, heavily Biden, also Obama. We need to make sure that, yes, those resources are available, finish the wall, but we also need to be willing to deport and give the president the tools and the power to be able to engage in significant deportations, and not just criminals, but part of the people who now represent the 51.5 million foreign born. There are a large block of people who've been released into the United States who are actually existing off of the social welfare state. Milton Friedman famously said he's all for open borders if you don't have a social welfare state. We do. Congress is going to have to deliver there. The second issue Congress is going to have to deliver on is reducing deficit spending by a lot. It is not enough to give lip service. Right now, I'm hearing my colleagues talking about, tax cuts. I'm for tax cuts. But I want to make sure that when we do that, we're honest about deficits and we're honest about the level of cutting that is going to need to occur so that we don't continue deficit spending. Those are two good examples where I think that'll decide whether Congress can come back or not as Republican in 2 years. But honestly, that's not what should be our metric and our guidepost. Our metric and our guidepost ought to be to deliver for the American people. Let the elections take care of themselves. Yeah. I believe if we deliver, we'll do well.
I agree with you on that final point. Let me ask you: are you concerned any about? And I've seen this pop up a few different times now. Some of the tariff talk, or is that start of negotiations? That's where Trump is going to start from, and then work away from that. What do you get concerned about some of that tariff discussion?
So, I have had a significant number of conversations with people who I know will be heavily involved in the administration, having debating the tariff issue. Look, I think tariffs are a really important part of the puzzle of both restoring American manufacturing, but also checking some of the abuses that some of our foreign neighbors have engaged in. China having exploited most favored nation and other things to undermine our well-being, and they're constantly engaged in theft, intellectual property, and targeting us to undermine us in espionage and undermining our markets. We need to reset the table there. You can generate a lot of revenue with tariffs as well. So I'm for tariffs, however, only if you have corresponding federal income tax relief, so that you have more money in your pocket as an American to make a decision about how you're going to spend the money. Let me give you an example. If you do a 10% worldwide tariff, which is rumored to be something that the president would consider, or higher, even I've heard, or it's heavily on China and then 10% worldwide, right? All these different options. Okay, well, that's a tax on a lot of our goods and services. You will remember that when we did a tariff on the farm community, or tariffs, I'm sorry, on China, we had to pay farmers like $40 billion because of the two-way impact of the tariffs. We have to be prepared for the impact of tariffs to reset our trade relationships and bolster American manufacturing, and frankly, to reset the table for Americans. To do that, you and I need more money in our pockets, because if the taxes go up on the goods that we buy, then we need to have more, and there'll be more revenue to the Treasury because of the increased tax on those goods. If you're taxing imports from China and other places, then you need to reset that table in terms of the money in our pocket with broader income tax cuts that will help the middle class in particular. So we'll figure all this out the best we can. I've got to work with the administration. But the biggest thing is we've got to deliver like we said we would deliver, and go down very specifically with all of the things we said we deliver on: border security, strong economy, tax rates that are fair for the working class, but are balanced with respect to how we handle deficit spending. Make sure that we have a strong military that's not woke, root out all the weaponized bureaucrats in Washington. I could keep going down the list, but we have to deliver. There's 15 or 20 things that I think we need to deliver on.
Yeah. Well, and I know you sent out a tweet just the other day of some of the principles guiding your work in the 119th Congress. Congressman, just real quick, if you can, in just a couple of minutes here, just what are some of those guiding principles that you want people to know that you're going to be focused on in this upcoming Congress?
Sure, and I've mentioned a couple of them. We need permanent policy fixes on the border. You need to deport people regardless of whether they're a quote unquote criminal. We have to have zero conversation about future flow until we've secured the border, period. I don't want to hear all this stuff. We need our cheap labor. No, secure the border first. Tax packages have to be balanced, not have deficit spending. We've got to stop these supplemental spending bills that are not paid for every time there's a disaster. We're about to have a $100 billion bill because of the hurricanes. We have to build that in, or tell states that it's their job to rebuild. We can't keep printing money every time there's a disaster. We've got to make sure we can afford health care again. That means expanded health savings accounts to empower patients and doctors, not insurance companies. We've got to cut the bureaucrats and the waste and the weaponized government against the people. Also, only American citizens should vote. My SAVE Act would have done that. Let's make sure that only American citizens vote in American elections. You got to cut the entirety of the Inflation Reduction Act. Stop all the EV mandates. Stop the subsidies on the solar panels and the wind that are undermining American energy. No Chinese ownership of our land and farms. Members of Congress shouldn't be trading stocks. Our military should not be woke. It should be strong and powerful. Get out of the United Nations. Gut all the international organizations. End the draft. Keep the draft, but don't draft my daughter. Period. That is a non-starter. Get Washington out of the education business. Take out the cartels and the gangs roaming our streets and secure our communities. Tax the remittances going back to Mexico. apply fees to the parolees to pay for all the stuff we're dealing with the border. Otherwise, get America out of our get the federal government out of Americans' lives and do our job. But that's just my short list. But there are a few other things, but those are the big things I'm focusing on right now.
Congressman, as always, appreciate your time. You and your family have a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for joining the Mark Davis Show on 660 AM The Answer today.